Hey everyone, it's Clint. Welcome to Sweetcast. I got really inspired by Frank Miller, in particular this documentary that's a little dated. I saw it on YouTube on a channel called Gregory Golda, and I'm pretty sure that this is some kind of copyright violation, but whatever. So it looks like it's some documentary that aired on TV. They've even got the advertisements and everything recorded and linked throughout the video. I wanted to look at Frank Miller in specific and how he went from trying to get into comics to essentially writing that Daredevil run that everybody, or most people on all accounts, said was fresh, and it did things that you wouldn't normally see in comics. It was very different for what was happening at the time. When I think about Frank Miller, I don't usually think about his art, even though obviously he was an artist. He, did the art for much of his own work. I think most of his own work, if not all. I don't know. I've got to look into that. Fact check me below. But for me, what is most memorable about him is him as a writer. All right, so I want to go through this process with you of Frank Miller getting into comics. I'm going to play a little bit of this video and show you, and you tell me, how is this different from what is going on today in today's comic book industry when new talent is being ushered in?
Neil was my mentor. I mean, he was very generous with his time. I simply called him up and asked him if I could show him my pictures. And he had me over to his studio. He was running a big shop then that did advertising work. I never really worked there, but he would always take my phone call, and I would come over and he'd tell me how terrible my work was.
Okay, I gotta pause it there real quick. So he's talking about Neil Adams. He would go to Neil Adams, show him his work, and Neil Adams would essentially eviscerate it. But what he was doing was he was still answering the phone. He was still giving him feedback. And I gotta say also, going into this, Frank Miller was just hungry for work. He was hungry to work in comics. Let's continue on.
Beyond just berating me and telling me to move back to Vermont because I was hopeless, he'd pull out tracing paper and start correcting me.
But Frank keeps trying, and one day his efforts pay off.
And then one day I came in and he just picked up the phone to Gold Key Comics and said, "I got somebody for you." And he got me my first job. It was Twilight Zone Comics. I spent a week drawing every page. Usually that's something you do within a day. It was my first professional job, and I took forever on it. It was 3 pages long, and I took 3 weeks to draw it. But it was a start.
Soon, other doors are opened.
Frank Miller had done a couple issues of Spectacular Spider-Man, which had featured Daredevil in them.
Yeah, Daredevil was mine.
It became clear that was what he wanted to do, and so they gave him a shot at doing Daredevil.
Marvel puts Frank Miller to work on Daredevil, and what he does with the red-suited crime fighter will send shockwaves throughout the comic book universe.
Now, no matter how you feel about Frank Miller, I think it is hard to deny that he did indeed make a huge impact on comics. I think a lot of modern comics and storytelling is based off of Frank Miller's tone and some of the ideas that he implemented in comics. Obviously, there are others as well. But something that I thought about this process is you have a couple things going on. One, you have a creator that's really hungry to be making new stuff. If his desire was just to get paid doing it, make a living, make his mark on the industry, or just that creative drive. I'm sure it could have been a multitude of reasons. But one thing you have him moving into the industry, and then you also have the comic industry and the current status quo. Now, back then, things were different than they are today. And I remember in this documentary, often people were saying that he was doing things in comics that you didn't ever see before. It was very different, especially for what was happening at the time. Now, I'm not going to say definitively, but I think it's possible that if Frank Miller was coming up in today's comic book industry and he wrote the exact same run on Daredevil, I'm not sure that it would have the same kind of impact in today's current context as it did back in the 80s. And that's because a big part of what makes something fresh is the context. Comics have seen a lot of the same things. We see it all the time, almost ad nauseum. I actually looked this up just to see what people were saying what people were saying online. There we go. I found this post on Reddit, and it was essentially a comic reader that was expressing some of his frustration with how boring comics have gotten. Now, when I read this post, I'm not really going to go into detail. To me, it read like this poor guy wants to love comics. He's got a lot on his mind about it, and he sort of just info dumps out a big fat paragraph about the problem with comics and the lack of originality. There's a word for this, and it's called stale. I think this is massive. This is a big reason why it's so stale. So what does the world need today? It's not really necessarily Frank Miller, but it's somebody like Frank Miller, and it's also the same kind of circumstances that Frank Miller had. He had somebody working in comics, a professional, that was willing to take him under his wing a little bit, mentor him a little bit, tell him that he wasn't ready, and then when the time was right, connect him and get him his first paying gig, which was a 3-page story. Now, the documentary kind of glossed over how he goes from making a 3-page story to then all of a sudden writing Daredevil. It sounded like it was a pretty interesting process, and Marvel, to their credit, has throughout history done a lot of reaching out to creators and taking more risks, it seems like, with pulling in new blood. Today, I don't think that is the case, or if they do believe that they're taking risks, I don't think they're going about it in the same kinds of ways. You've got somebody that is hungry to make comics and to create, and then you've got mentorship and the ability to help them, figure out how to get a foot up, essentially, based off of their merit when they are ready. And then the other thing is an industry that, maybe it was stale. Maybe people didn't even know it was stale. There's so many, I'll go back to this Reddit post. So many people downvoted this. These are 24% upvoted. And they didn't like necessarily or agree with a lot of his comments. And that's because they didn't see it as stale. But when something comes out that's truly fresh, it really underlines why everything else was so stale. And you think of Frank Miller and a lot of the things that he wrote, how many different creators did he inspire, and how much of the comics industry did he change, just creatively speaking, because he had fresh ideas and he was hungry to get those ideas out there. So thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. I'd love to know in the comments below, can you think of a story, a comic book in particular, that really stuck out to you as fresh? What was a title that when you read changed things for you as far as comics go and storytelling? I'd love to know. I think there are a lot more examples out there. Frank Miller, I got to say, did inspire me. He impressed me a lot when I was thinking about his process of not only breaking in, but just striving to push forward and put out great stories. So I think I'm going to start collecting in regular just issues. That's one thing I don't do all that much, and that is collecting just single issue floppies. I think I'm going to go for his original Daredevil run, because why not? One of the first comics I read was from his run, but I don't know that I've ever actually read the whole thing from A to Z. So that'll be fun to experience it in the original format that it was published in. I'm going to, check eBay first, check my local comic shop, see what I can find. So thanks very much. Appreciate it. And I'll see you next time.